Welcome to Storytime Digital Media Radio. I'm Megan Fox, and I'm here with Kevin DuJan, and we have a hot topic tonight. We are talking about what is going on, or more appropriately, WTF is going on at the Village of Tinley Park. Kevin and I went out there last night to the Village meeting because over 2,000, actually now it's 3,000 people have joined a Facebook page called Citizens of Tinley Park to protest the Village's decision to put an affordable housing building in 2,000, actually now it's 3,000 people have joined a Facebook page called Citizens of Tinley Park. Heck, protest the village. Okay, we've got some technical difficulties. I think perhaps the microphone was up too loud on Kevin's side. Anyway, we will continue. The Citizens of Tinley Park have about 3,000 people on their website and on Facebook, and they have organized, because the Village of Tinley Park is about to put in an affordable housing building built by Buckeye, this Buckeye group, which is an Ohio company. And they have gotten probably federal grants. We're not sure yet because we haven't got the FOIAs back yet because the village is stalling. But we went out to the meeting last night and the villagers really let them have it, didn't they, Kevin? What were your thoughts?
Oh, they sure did. And so I think it's called the Buckeye Community Hope and Change Foundation. It's something like that. It's out of Ohio, which is my home state. And it's just very strange to me that this Ohio company, you know, there's plenty of stuff left to develop in Ohio. You don't need to come to Illinois if you're an Ohio company to look for projects to do. So to come all the way out here to Illinois to Tinley Park and to want to do this project, it just seems really strange. It seems that there must be more to this than just this one building that they're claiming. To me, it seems that this is a foot in the door to do a lot more stuff that they're just not telling people about at the moment. You know, we heard talk that there's actually 7 buildings that they want to do in this low-income development for Tinley Park. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with a low-income development if you are putting it in a place that makes sense for the community, that's going to be good for the community. But what's interesting is this all centers around starting with this thing called a roundabout, which is interesting. So I'm trying to share a picture here with you if you can see this roundabout. Can you see the roundabout picture?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so some of this stuff is a little complicated and a little hard to understand, but in terms of that roundabout thing, the village had this plan to redevelop this area, you know, and everything was based around getting this roundabout approved, you know, like they do in Europe. And I don't really see it too many of these kind of things in Illinois or here in the Midwest anywhere, but they wanted to first develop around that, but then later they decided not to. But that whole roundabout area had this thing called the Legacy Code, and that's a little bit complicated, but the Legacy Code was this development plan that they had. It was all structured around things going around this roundabout. Well, then the roundabout, they decided not to do that. So the Legacy Code is kind of moot, but it's still on the books. It's still there. And this Legacy Code was, I guess, their scheme to entice development to the area.
Well, right, and it's specifically for bringing businesses to Oak Park Avenue. You know, Oak Park Avenue is like their little downtown area. We've actually talked about it before because we go see the benches all the time, and we love the car shows there. I used to live in Tinley, so I'm real familiar with it. And that Oak Park Avenue is just a wonderful street, and there's a lot of great little places, and they're trying to entice more businesses down at that southern end.
And Megan, let me say, you know, when I first moved to Chicago, I've been here for 10 years now, and one of the first places that I really felt at home and felt that it was just charming was that Oak Park Avenue and those parade of benches. And I had the great fortune of just getting off the Metro train one day and seeing them without anyone ever telling me about them or knowing about it or reading about it. So it's kind of a magical thing that you just come off the train and you find such beautiful artwork. And I really don't use that term lightly, you know, to call something beautiful and amazing. But these, every year, they have such talented artists that I think it's folk art that's even better than something you'd find in the Art Institute. Some of these benches are really incredible.
I totally agree. My kids love it. We go there to take pictures on them every single year.
And the other thing I want to say too is these people in Tinley Park who I have encountered through the years, I think they might be my favorite people that I've ever met in Chicago. They are really nice people, but they also still have that kind of Chicago edge, you know, which is known around the country, you know, Chicago's known for. So they're classic Chicago people, but still so nice. And there's that small town, homey kind of feel to Tinley Park that you don't see in a lot of other cities. And especially with that festival with the benches on Oak Park Avenue, it's a wonderful community. It really is. And so, you know, this development project, this legacy code thing, it looked like it was an idea that they had to get people to come and develop, but it didn't work out the way that they intended. And through a bunch of different missteps that the village made, and that it seems that this director of planning, Amy Connolly, that she made, they wanted to be high end, but then they started bringing in the dollar store and other places that then scared away the high end businesses. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's what I have heard, that, you know, that they were trying to attract more high-end retailers, and when the retailers do a search around the area where they're looking to build, if they find dollar stores, liquor stores, discount malls, they don't want to build there, and so they moved to Orland instead. And Orland Park is a very rich suburb with a very booming retail base, and it helps to offset the property taxes. Now, property taxes in Tinley Park are very high. We heard some people at the meeting last night tell us that their taxes are $12,000 a year. That is a very high property tax. They need in Tinley Park businesses on that strip to offset the high property tax, and that would really help. That would help people afford to live in Tinley. Most people can't live in Tinley because they can't pay the property tax. It isn't because maybe they couldn't buy the house, but they can't afford the tax. So the legacy code initially was, they had a zoning thing in it where when businesses, or if there were going to be any residential like buildings, that they would have to be commercial required, which meant there would have to be commercial space underneath. Like they have these nice condos by the train tracks that have big stores on the bottom or a restaurant on the bottom and condos on the top. Well, that brings business, and business is revenue generating. And in order to offset property taxes, you need businesses paying those taxes to offset that. So, of course, that is a good idea. But here's where they made the major mistake with the legacy code. The board, for whatever reason, and we haven't got to the bottom of it yet because we just started researching this, but the village board decided that they were going to give an unelected planning commission, which is a board of volunteers. They were going to give this board carte blanche to plan the village without a vote from the board. Now, they did it because they thought, well, we're going to less red tape, you know, less red tape for people to have to go through. We want it to be easy for the businesses to come to Tinley Park. We want it to be welcoming and inviting, and we don't want them to have to go through all this red tape. But by doing that, I truly believe that they have broken the law. I don't think you can take the voters' rights away. That's no representation. I don't know how you can elect people to represent you, and then they turn around and give their voting power to an unelected board. And then last night at the hearing, what we heard was, we can't do anything about it. We don't have a say. The mayor of the damn town can't do a damn thing about it because he gave away his vote.
And so what I understand is there's this woman, Amy Connolly. Can you see her picture?
Yes. So
she was at the board meeting last night, and she's their director of planning. She makes $160,000 a year. So let that sink in. And so she's their director of planning, but it sounds like the planning has been a fiasco because this legacy project that they wanted to do, that never went anywhere. And now they've kind of given up on it, and they're going to put in low-income housing instead. Well,
let's talk about the low-income housing for a moment and get to the real crux of this issue. And now that we've talked about the legacy code a little bit, this will make some sense. So Buckeye, the Buckeye Foundation of Hope and Change for the future of changing communities into something you don't want, they, who are from Ohio, came into Tinley Park, and they started having conversations with the village somewhere around March of last year, we think, although rumor has it it could be years. They started having conversations with the village around March that they wanted to build this low-income housing with no retail space on the bottom. Now remember, I just said the legacy code required retail space, or commercial space, okay, not just retail, so maybe a restaurant or retail or some kind of commercial space on the bottom.
Because their goal for that area was to have people, pedestrians walking all the time, going to the shops, to have it be really lively, and then people living above the stores, and the people living above the stores would support the stores, and the stores would encourage people to live there. You know, that's what people want to do now, to create a nice downtown that'd be thriving.
Right. And so this Buckeye group wanted to build something that was not to code. Okay. They wanted to build a 47 family building with no commercial space. And they wanted to build it with no commercial space. And so they got to talking to the village, and they said the village was very nice to them. And no, the village never told any of the people that this was going on, that these talks were happening. And somehow Amy Connolly, who sits on the planning commission, who's the planning director, she decided to slip in a zoning change into a motion that was about banning hookah stores on Oak Park Avenue. This went before the village board. Now, anything that's going to change a zoning law has to, by law, go before in a zoning hearing. There was no hearing for this. This never got a hearing. She slipped it into this motion to ban hookah stores and other paraphernalia stores from Oak Park Avenue, which of course she knew the village board was going to vote yes on. So just like the healthcare bill that had all kinds of other junk stuffed into it that nobody knew was there, and Nancy Pelosi said we had to pass before we could know what was in it, Amy Connolly admitted at the hearing last night that she's the one that wrote it, that put it in there.
And the timing on this is really interesting too, because I believe this was pushed through right when the election was happening. And so 3 board members, I believe, were taken off the board or were about to leave the board. So it sounds like this was pushed through in a period of some kind of flux, that maybe people weren't reading things as carefully as they would have been, or they just read it enough to understand that this was primarily a ban on these hookah establishments and these kind of unsavory things that people didn't want in the area. And then there's this thing on there removing the requirement to have the commercial space on these property developments. So that felt like that was slipped in there advantageously. And so this is one of these things, Megan, where
I feel like I've lived too long and seen too much.
Right. You know, exactly. And for someone, you know, I grew up as a Democrat, and you just know that their tactics, and you know the tactics of the political left and the Alinsky methods. And this really sounds like the tactic of taking advantage of the opportunity that not really people are paying attention. Let's slip this through. We're going to slip this change and get rid of that commercial requirement for these buildings. And knowing that it's going to affect this development that they want to bring in, this low-income housing thing, that needs to have that commercial requirement for those buildings removed for it to be built, because this developer, this Buckeye Foundation, Hope and Change, whatever, they want to build without that commercial first floor. They don't want to have a commercial first floor and then the low-income housing above it, because I would suspect that the high-end retailers that the village wanted to be as that commercial tenants, they wouldn't want to be in buildings that had the low-income housing above it, because that would not be the clientele that they would be servicing in those retail establishments that would have been in a commercial development like that. So it looks like people at the village were pretty sneaky, and by all clues, it looks like this Amy Connolly was sneaky and knew what she was doing to have that change made, so that then a couple months later, this Buckeye group can come in and they could push forward this development that they wanted that would not have been allowed if that change hadn't been made. So I just find that very interesting. And last night at the board meeting, this guy, his name was Dave Petro or DePietro, something like that. He was the representative for Buckeye Development.
It sounded like pepperoni.
I know people are joking today, and they're saying he's Dave Pepperoni or Pepperoncini or Papadelli, something like that. But it's something with the P. So
I think it's Petroni.
Petroni. So get this. So then he shows up, and he has a bad attitude from the very beginning. And he does a couple political tricks. I don't know if you caught them. I know some people in the audience, they really sharp, and they caught on to it quick. But he came in and he realized he had to do some deflection. So he had to get people, talking about something else. They wouldn't see this thing of how convenient and coincidental and miraculous this change.
Do we have a picture of him?
I don't have a picture of him up handy. No, I can look for one though. But
okay.
He's in the videos, part 2 of the videos that we posted from last night. It's all about him speaking. And so right away he tries to say, oh, anyone who's opposed to this, you really just don't want the kind of people who be living here. So he was implying, this guy was very subtle, and he was very clever the way he would do it, but he would basically be throwing the race card around that if you oppose this project, then you must be a racist, or you must not like certain kinds of people, you're some kind of a bigot. And so he was very masterful of making that kind of a sentiment be in the room and create a tension without coming out and just hammering those exact words. But he would say things like, oh, this is really about the people. But it wasn't. What this is about is the shenanigans that went into forcing this through and changing the legacy code, because when this was all envisioned, low-income housing was not envisioned for that space. They've been holding this space fallow and available because they had a really nice plan for the development. They wanted their village to take the next step and do an evolution, and they planned this out really well. And now they're shifting gears. I'm wondering who is profiting from that. I'm wondering who is going to benefit from those low-income houses being built there. But this is back to what I was saying, Megan, I think this is just a foothold. This is just a foot in the door. And I wonder if this Buckeye company is building these low-income housing now, and then later they'll end up building like a school or something, because the schools are really big money. And this Buckeye group, this Buckeye Foundation thing, I believe back in Ohio, they're involved with building all kind of schools. And you know how much of a gold mine that is for a construction company.
Well, the schools, that's a very interesting topic, because at the meeting, several moms were very upset and saying, and teachers, there were teachers there too, saying, hey, my daughter's class has 32 kids in it. Where are you going to put all these extra kids? Because the requirements for the living is going to be 47 families with a minimum of 2 kids each. The schools are already overpacked. And one of them, the one that's closest to the building, has already been expanded, and I've been told it can't be expanded anymore unless they would acquire some more land. And I don't think it's available. And even so, the people in Tinley Park are going out of their minds, because I already told you how high their property taxes are. They're just going to go up. That's more kids to put in school. Now listen, Tinley Park is flooded with affordable rental units. I know this because I used to live in one. There is no shortage of affordable rental units in Tinley Park, and there are some nice ones. I lived in Edgewater Walk. It was a beautiful condos on one side, apartments on the other, beautiful lake and trees, and it was like living in a tree house. We loved it there. And the rent was $1,100 a month for a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom. It was very spacious and nice and affordable. And there were cheaper ones and there were more expensive ones. And a lot of them are sitting empty. That's the thing that a lot of people brought up at the meeting that were very upset about was, wait a minute. If there are these people in Tinley Park that need affordable housing, we have tons of it. It's everywhere. There is no need to create more traffic, more congestion, more cost for the schools. And that shameless man from Buckeye, that Petroni guy, brought up free lunch programs. Can we talk about the free lunch programs, please? Because that was insane.
And can you see, I put up the picture, the Petroni guy, he's the one with his hands in the air, like, the Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars, like he's going to shoot lightning at the village resident that's speaking his mind. and that's something they let him do, which was strange too at the meeting. Typically when there's public comment, the public is allowed to stand up and speak their mind, but there isn't some adversary there like to debate you. But this Petroni guy kept jumping up like a whack-a-mole, and he would go over and would argue with people, which I thought was very strange. The other weird thing he did too, he started talking about those school lunches, and he was talking about, oh, we're going to build 46 apartments, and you have people who are on school lunches already, so we're going to build this so that they can live here in these apartments. But that made no sense, because if they're going to school in Tinley Park, then they already live in Tinley Park.
Live there. I know. He said, look at how many children in Tinley Park are benefiting from the federal school lunch program. There is clearly a need for affordable housing here. Wait a minute. No, there isn't. That argument makes no sense. If there were no children in Tinley Park benefiting from the federal school lunch program, then maybe there would be a need for affordable housing, because it would mean that none of those children not applied. Why can't I think of the word?
That meet the requirements.
That meet the requirements. Thank you. That would mean that none of them were already in Tinley, but there are. And there are plenty, and they're already living in the affordable housing that Tinley has.
But this guy, okay, remember I said he was really slick with what he would do. So first he sets up the thing where if you oppose this in any way, well, then you're just a racist. That's a classic Alinsky tactic, where you set it up so that you're making anyone who'd be in opposition to this afraid to speak, because all white people are afraid of being called racist. It's this thing, especially in the suburbs, that suburban people are just absolutely live in terror of being called any kind of a name. So he sets this up. Then he says this thing of, oh, well, this is for the children. That's another lie that they like to push. Whenever government's doing anything bad to you, they always like to say, this is for the children. Think of the children. But really logically think about it. He's going to build new apartments, but he's not saying, that the people who are living there now are going to move into these. That makes no sense, because later in the meeting, you find out that the apartments that are available for rent, that are empty and that people want to rent out, those are renting for less money than the apartments that this Buckeye wants to build. Right. So explain that to me. So people who right now, if they want to move to Tinley, maybe they can find an apartment for $600 a month. This man wants to build these low-income housing projects that will rent for like $800 a month. All the way up to like $1,500. So all the way up to $1,500. So who are these people that he wants to bring in? Because if these apartments are vacant and available right now, they're for Tinley residents, but Tinley residents are already housed, and there's a bunch of empty apartments all over Tinley because one of the residents said last night, "You guys have done nothing but build rental units, and I did not move into this neighborhood to be the only one of the minority property owners paying all the property tax for all these rental units, because that's what's happening." Let's talk about the rental unit property tax versus the homeowner property tax. This came out in the meeting and it was shocking. That building that he's going to build, it's like a $15 million project, and that company's going to make a bundle on it, including federal grants, will house 47 families. Hold on one second, because one of the other facts that came out too is, so this building that he wants to build as in that legacy area, the legacy district, I think they call it, it'll cost between $15 million and $16 million to build. I heard that if you would build the same buildings in this other part of town that they have available, it would only cost $11 million to build there. Right. So he wants to build in this special area because he's going to get a whole bunch of tax credits and goodies from the government to build in this legacy area for some reason, and it will cost $5 million more than if he built somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is nuts. It's nutty. I mean, it's hard to explain how it really upsets me that he came in with the prejudice stuff, because the people of Tinley Park made me proud last night, because they all stood up and said, so many of them said, how dare you talk about us like you know who we are. Now you see that he did that as a strategy.
Of course he did, but everybody
Thought that would be a smart strategy to come in and do that.
Everyone pointed out this is a community with a big heart for people in need. We have Together We Cope, which is one of the greatest outreach programs, and it's around on the South Side. It is a thrift store slash rescue center. It helps women and families in need who are in crisis. It is a wonderful store and organization and charity. And the people of Tinley Park give generously to it. They want.
I'm not so good with the tax information and the math on.
Okay, so the 46 units. Okay, of course, renters do not pay property tax. So the landowner or the landlord is responsible for the property tax.
So
but
this Buckeye Development Company, they'd be responsible for the property taxes. But sometimes Buckeye says it's a nonprofit foundation, and sometimes they say it's a management company. So that's an interesting picture.
Yeah, I know. They're not nonprofit. That's just a tax status. And so for sure they're getting a reduced tax. He, in his own words, said that with 46 families in the building, they estimate their property tax to be $80,000 per year. Now, when one of the spokesmen for the community said nobody here pays, anywhere near $600 a year or, $1,400 a year. My taxes are $12,000 a year. Let's just say that it was $6,000 a year, okay, times 46 families. Let's just average it out that they would, if they were homeowners, that they would be paying $6,000 a year, which would probably be a lot more than that. That would be $276,000 a year for the Village of Tinley Park. Now, why on earth are they wanting a building that is only going to generate $80,000 of revenue for the village when they could have, if they put any amount of effort into this, they could be getting homeowners to buy in Tinley by building that center, by building the town center with shops, restaurants, Starbucks. There's no Starbucks on Oak Park Avenue, now that I think about it. Why the heck isn't there a Starbucks on Oak Park Avenue?
And just so people understand, so this development that this Amy Connolly and these other people that are behind this, pushing in this low-income housing thing, that has no commercial on the ground floor like it's supposed to have.
Tell them what they claimed. Tell them
it's only going to be generating $80,000 a year in tax revenue, as opposed to if they built, condos or they built whatever they were supposed to build there, that would be generating $10,000 per family. They could be getting $460,000 of taxes as opposed to $80,000. And here's the part that no one talked about last night that I found interesting. So think about that. Those are 46 families. Supposedly they're going to be families where it's a single mom and two kids, something like that.
Yeah.
So each of those kids is going to the public school. How much does it cost to educate each child? Isn't it at least like $5,000 or $6,000 per child?
At least.
Plus all the other civic expenses like the police and the fire department and everyone else that will have to.
Don't forget the free lunches.
And the free lunches. So making that low-income development is going to actually cost the village money.
Oh yeah. So somebody somewhere on this planning commission or on the board are going to benefit from this financially somehow, whether it's been through campaign contributions, trips to Bora Bora on the Buckeye private jet, who knows?
And this is where I think the trick comes in, because what I think the trick is that, so they're going to build this first, and once this is built, then no one else will want to build anything, based on that legacy plan or based on whatever, near this low-income housing development. Then I think Buckeye will just get a sweetheart deal on whatever other land they want in the area. Then they'll build more of these. And then I think that this company, what they're really angling for is to build some kind of school or some other kind of a municipal building. That's where I think their big payoff is. So they'll make a little bit of money doing this project, but this is really the down payment on the big thing that they're going to get once they change that area enough and they change the perception of the area, drive all the other home values down. Then I think they actually might go in and start buying up houses, because a realtor talked last night and she said that if this low-income housing project gets built, that all the other condos and homes in the area that already no one can sell, or sell for close to what people paid for it, and people's mortgages are underwater or foreclosed or empty. I think it's going to lower all the prices. So this, I think, is a strategy of this company. You know, this man with his hands outstretched like the evil emperor. I really think this is the only reason they're coming all the way from Ohio. They saw a ripe opportunity to come in and put something down that will not be a good value, that will actually cost the village money, that will cause short-term problems. Then they can just redevelop the way that they want. What you're going to end up with is an area that is very different than what Tinley Park is today. It's going to take away that small town charm, you know, the nice, friendly community. They're going to create a whole new atmosphere there.
Well, and the thing is that I don't think anybody at that meeting is afraid of the type of people who need affordable housing, because they welcome those people in the affordable housing they already have. So it really is not about the people, and I really, it's not about that at all. It is about the fact that right next door to that, where that building is going to be, there is a condo building, and a couple of people talked about how, you know, some seniors who live in those condos, their housing values have already fallen and they cannot sell their condos. It is a really bad situation. Some of them are foreclosed and empty. And if more of these rental units go up next to them, their property value is going to plummet. Because first of all, I know when I was looking for a house, I didn't want a house right next to a rental unit, because I'm sorry, but I've lived in rental units, and it doesn't matter in what neighborhood you live in a rental unit. Home ownership helps people to take better care of their surroundings. And
Well,
it doesn't matter what neighborhood you're in. When
if you're a homeowner, you wanna have property next to another homeowner, because then there's a chance you're going to have the same neighbor for 5, 6, maybe 10 years. At least about 2 to 5 years, I think you can count on having the same neighbor. When you're next to a rental property, it's a constant turnover every year of new neighbors, and it's not a real community vibe. And so people who want to live on a street where you grow up knowing Mrs. Johnson down the block, or, you know, Mrs. Smith or Mr. Lee, you know, these nice characters in your neighborhood, that's what you move out to the suburbs for. If you want to live downtown Chicago, that's where you live, in places where the people who live next to you change every year.
And I mean, really, Tinley has tons and tons of rental units. And I agree with the people at the meeting who said, why are you flooding Tinley Park with more and more and more rental units? What we need are businesses. We need retail. We need commercial. We need a sportsplex. Everybody cheered and screamed for a sportsplex. I don't know why anybody on that planning commission hasn't brought up, you know, why aren't they trying to get a sportsplex built there? A sports complex for the kids, for the community. Honest to goodness, you can't find somebody who'd want to run something like that?
Oh, and that's crazy, because if you built something like that, and that'll be hopping, because if they did that right, and not just a sportsplex, but to have the natatorium, to have the big pool and all the indoor pool facilities, and that's actually rare out there in the suburbs. Orland Park has a really nice outdoor one, but it's seasonal. They don't have an indoor.
Yeah, but they did build a new sportsplex or whatever, and that's very popular, and it brings in, you know, tournaments from other states, and, you know, they can have big, huge games there, and that brings in revenue. And, you know, if I know anything about the kids in Tinley Park, they are competitive in their sports. And so they're all involved in it. And that would be a great thing for the community. It would be a terrific draw. You know, the other thing that people talked about at the meeting, was the traffic congestion. People who don't know about Tinley Park, the Tweeter Center, I don't think it's called the Tweeter Center anymore. It keeps changing names. It's the big concert venue, is right down Oak Park Avenue, or down Harlem, or Oak Park Avenue, one of those. Anyway, it's right off of there. And it is huge, and it brings in, you know, they have huge concerts there. When there's a concert, the traffic in Tinley is unbelievable. So they're going to put this huge apartment complex right there to just clog up more traffic by the Tweeter Center. That's so stupid. But the thing that bothered me the most was that This really seemed like a sneaky plan to sneak through a zoning change that should never have happened without a public hearing. And the village never, ever said anything to the community about this building. The first thing they heard about it was in the Chicago Tribune by Dennis Sullivan, or it was in the Southtown. He writes for the Tribune, but also the Southtown. And it was an article, just a small little article that Dennis Sullivan uncovered that they were going to do this. And 3,000 people mobilized in 72 hours to get to that meeting and tell them what they thought. Now, we have recorded videos and put them up on YouTube, and you can see them. And they are incredible to watch these people just tell their village off. I mean, it's great because
I want to talk about that for a minute, because I want to talk about how impressed I was with the things that people said, where I was amazed. You know, I've lived in Chicago for 10 years, and I don't think I've ever been to any kind of a board meeting or other public civic event where people were so articulate in what they had to say, and so well researched and so well thought out. Speaker after speaker who came forward, and mind you, the board didn't allow everyone who wanted to speak to have their chance. The board got tired of listening at 10 o'clock, and they stopped listening and said, that's it, we're not listening to anymore. But everyone who came forward had a different perspective on this, and everyone said consistently the same thing. That Tinley Park is a place that has a big heart, that they always help people that are in need, that Tinley Park has a glut of rental properties already existing that actually rent for less money than this Buckeye building that they want to build, the low-income housing. They already have properties that are renting lower than what that would be for, all in the area, so they don't need any more. But that what people are upset about is that they have lost trust in their government because their government has done something shady. And you know, in Chicago, there's all this stuff always happening where government's involved in shady stuff. Just the other day, I think it was the same day of the board meeting on the 2nd, the Chicago Tribune ran an article about this one commissioner in Tinley Park that has been holding commission meetings for something called the Main Street Commission, which I guess is a commercial, business commission. And he owns a pizza parlor, and he was having the village buy pizzas from his company to serve always at these commission meetings. And some other person was busted for, her brother has a flower shop, and so the village was sending no bid contracts for flowers to that person. Someone else had a printer shop, and the village of Tinley was sending $1 million worth of printing to this person in no bid contracts. So people are seeing that there is corruption here at the village, that of course it's Illinois, so people just expect this everywhere. But this latest thing was just a bridge too far, where people saw that this was being pushed through. They didn't like that rules were changed, and then 2 months later, oh, what a coincidence, now we can do this low-income housing because we changed the rules 2 months ago by sneaking in that little thing. And people notice that, and people get really upset about that. They feel that this was done in a shady way. One of the board members was a hero board member. What is his name? Pinotti?
The developer?
No, that's that Peretti guy. But one of the board members.
Oh,
he has
Michael. Oh, you caught me without my notebook. Pinotti.
Yeah, so you could look that up.
I will. I'll look it up right now while you're talking. I'll get it.
He, and I don't mean disrespect, because this was a great guy. In fact, he's one of the best board members ever that I've seen in Chicago. He stood up and he said, "There's no way that this should have been done without this board voting."
Michael Pinito.
Michael Pinito. He said, "There's no way that this board should have done this without us being able to vote, that this should be snuck in like this." And that Peretti guy from Buckeye, he kept saying, well, you have to obey by the codes that are in place, and these codes are in place.
They violated their own zoning laws.
And he made a threat. I don't know if you caught this.
Yeah, he did. He made a threat.
At the very end, he was very peeved after listening to the public keep saying, the village is screwing the community and not listening to the community. The village should have abided by its own rules. They changed the original rules to let this in. And this Peretti guy, he got up there, Megan, and he made a threat. He made a threat that was very clear. It was a very thinly veiled threat that clearly that his company would sue the village if the village tried to stop him. And that's a threat that his company sued in Ohio, a community in Cuyahoga Falls, not far from where I grew up. His company sued because at some point when they were trying to build something there, the community rose up against him, and he won in that instance. What I think is different here is the whole shenanigans that went on with changing that legacy plan.
Well, I think they violated the Constitution. They took away the people's right to be represented, and that cannot be legal. So if they did hand over and abdicate their responsibility to this unelected board, and that should be challenged in court, and if that can be proven, then this cannot go forward, because any decisions that Planning Commission made will be null and void. None of it was legal.
I think the reason he's making this threat so early is he realizes that he is not on the same solid footing that he was when he sued that village in Ohio. I think that they know that this is a shystery kind of a situation, but they're putting that threat out there because they know that the village is represented by the worst law firm in the state, that JENKINS. That JENKINS, wherever there is trouble with a public body in Illinois, it always seems like JENKINS is involved some way. JENKINS is the Village of Tinley Park's attorneys.
It really is uncanny. It really is uncanny.
They had this guy, Thomas Melody, sitting there, and Thomas Melody was just saying things that the developer wanted to hear.
Okay, we need to get a picture of him up. I'll work on that for you.
And so this guy, this Thomas Melody guy from JENKINS, he just mumbled. First of all, he didn't have his microphone on, was just mumbling, so people couldn't really hear him. But this is something that JENKINS does, is they give these public bodies bad legal advice, and it gets them into trouble. And it caused problems all across the state that they do this, and they give these public bodies advice that leads them to break the Freedom of Information Act, to break the Open Meetings Act.
Well, let's get right to the point about what JENKINS did. They cost the Village of Orland Park, or the Library of Orland Park, over not just the $55,000 lawsuit settlement they had to pay, but up to what, $200,000 in legal fees? Have we even calculated what the legal fees were that they spent fighting us on FOIA and Open Meetings Act violations?
And this was both the Village of Orland Park and also the Orland Park Public Library hiding documents. They were redacting things that the law didn't allow them to redact. They were holding illegal meetings at the library that then had to be voided by the Attorney General.
I sent you the picture, by the way, so you have it.
And so JENKINS was advising them that sure, you could break the law, sure, you could do all of these bad things. And this is something that is a pattern with them. And so,
oh, absolutely. And I think that it's worse than what we might have thought before. They seem to be a liability for anyone they represent, because I'm not sure if it's willful ignorance, where they give bad advice so that they can pad the bills and rack up legal bills after legal bills after legal bills until they're, just till the village is drowning in these legal bills, or if they really are that incompetent. I don't know. It's up for debate.
It is up for debate. I don't know. Can you see him?
Oh boy, there he is.
This Thomas Melody. I call him Songbird, one of the legal eagles over at JENKINS. And so
he was glaring at me in that picture. He was glaring right at me.
I know he was glaring at the public. They hate the public, and they hate when the public comes to meetings, and they hate when the public pays attention. They hate when the public knows their rights. Here's what they really hate. They hate when the public understands that the public has a First Amendment right to petition. This is part of your First Amendment right. Here in the United States of America, elected officials are not crowned heads of state. They are not royalty.
Or even crowned bozos of state.
Bozos, right. And so in America, we have this tradition of going back to the colonial days of Americans lampoon their elected officials, and they ridicule their elected officials. When elected officials are not doing what they're supposed to do, Americans don't just sit back and take that, because this is not Great Britain. We do not have a king. This is not Saudi Arabia.
That's right. And
where people
let's
have
talk
to live
about,
in fear and in terror
ridicule.
of ever speaking out against a government board. That's not the way we do things in America.
No, I want to talk about ridicule for a moment, because you have created a picture that has created a little bit of a buzz of David Seaman, the mayor of Tinley Park. And the reason why you created this satire cartoon, it's absolutely hilarious, taken from a Rolling Stone magazine cover, is that he was in Florida. The rumor was that he was in Florida as of Monday. And somebody called him on Monday and said, you better get home, because the town is like on fire and the villagers are gathering with tar and feathers, and you better get back here. And he said, I don't think so. It's not that big a deal. So nobody thought he was going to show up, because he was in Florida sunning himself on a beach somewhere. So Kevin put together a hilarious satirical cartoon of the mayor, and here it is.
And so this is a spoof of Jim Carrey did a Rolling Stone cover, many years ago back in the 90s. And so I immediately pictured this David Seaman down there in Florida having the time of his life, scampering around on the beach, when all of this hell was breaking loose here in Orland Park, and then he gets the call, he has to come rushing back home. That was a story that 7 or 8 different people told on Tuesday, that this is what happened, that he came racing back, because the Village of Tinley Park had never had an uprising like this where people...
No, they broke a record. They broke a record. They've never had as many. They had overflow rooms. They ran out of parking. People got turned away and had to go home.
They filmed a board meeting for the first time, apparently.
Yeah, and let's talk about this this satire that you made. Some people get their knickers in a twist over this picture and say that, this is not classy. This is not how we want to present ourselves, and you should not do that. That is not nice.
This is really funny, because this is something that happens only here in these Chicago suburbs. I'm not used to it. I've always lived in big cities, and so this is an interesting thing to see people out in the suburbs of Chicago saying things like, you shouldn't be allowed to say this, or you shouldn't be allowed to do satire, you shouldn't be allowed to ridicule or lampoon. It's almost as if some of these suburban people want to live in Saudi Arabia, or they want to...
I think if they truly have a problem with something as tame as that, then they really should consider moving to Saudi Arabia, because this is America, and we have the freedom of speech. And let me tell you something about freedom of speech. It was designed specifically to protect political speech, and political speech is satire, making cartoons, lampooning your political heads of whatever board, no matter how small, no matter how big. It has been going on as an American tradition since the beginning of this country. If you think that our cartoons are bad, you should see some of the ones that Abraham Lincoln was featured in. Shall we show him Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah, can you see this one? So down in Springfield, they have the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library Museum. It's a great thing. Disney helped design some of it. There's one exhibit that is the most amazing exhibit of any museum I've ever seen in my life, and it's a very simple thing. They have this twisty, turny hallway that kind of reminds you of the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland. And in that hallway, on the walls, they have all of these picture frames in different sizes that are all askew and bent, and the walls in this room and the floor, they're all jarring. And there's this whisper that's playing where people are whispering and reading these political cartoons about Lincoln that say the most awful, horrible things you can ever imagine. I don't even want to repeat them. And in each of the picture frames, there's one grotesque image of Lincoln after another. And this was commonplace. This is what they did back in the 1850s, 1860s. This is what they did back to the colonial days, Megan, with Benjamin Franklin and all of those guys, our founding fathers. This was American discourse, and this is all protected under the First Amendment. This is your free speech. You are allowed to lampoon the elected officials here and the different justices.
This is what makes this country great. This is it right here in a nutshell. The ability to make a cartoon like this that blasts your political leaders. If you had done this in the 1700s in England, you would be taken to the Tower of London and your head would be cut off. And our founders,
if you did this in Saudi Arabia today or in Thailand today,
Hey, if you do it in France to Muhammad, you get your head cut off also. So there is this whole thing going on right now that is very strange in our culture, where our American values are being attacked from every angle, even from people inside our country who have lost sight of what it means to be an American and what it means to be truly free. And it means that you have the right to express yourself and express your disgust with your political leaders. Now, Mayor David Seaman might not be as bad as, you know, I don't know, the president or anybody else you want to name in politics, like, you know, some terrible person like Nancy Pelosi. Maybe he's not. It does not matter when a man has abdicated his responsibility to an unelected board. He has taken away the rights of the people to vote in his town. He has taken away the rights of himself, an elected representative of the village, has taken away the right of the people to be heard and understood and given a vote on the board. That man deserves ridicule and shame for what he has done. What he has done is a terrible thing.
And Megan, this is part of a long-standing tradition. You know, I showed a couple other comments.
Oh my gosh, is that the Hillbuzz bee? Do you see what's stinging him?
This is some kind of a bee, and it's stinging the man as a dog and vomiting up whatever. So this is all part of free expression. This is political speech. This is a long-standing tradition of this. And it's just amusing to me that where we have this weird moment in our history where people are wanting to not be America anymore, and they're wanting it to be more like Saudi Arabia for some reason, where these elected officials get to be these potentates and these crowned heads that then, you know, want to come after people who lampoon them. But if you behave badly as an elected official, and this guy David Seaman during the meeting last night, we caught it on video a couple times. He is a very thin-skinned individual. And there were a couple times in the meeting where he felt disrespected by someone speaking, and he behaved, frankly, like a small child having tantrums. Right there, while he's sitting there in his mayor's seat and just having little tantrums, mini tantrums here and there. It was just very interesting to me because you can tell that they're not accustomed to people showing up to their meetings. They don't like when the public comes to the meeting.
Right. He even did a lot of, he yelled at people occasionally. And
oh, he yelled at people? Oh, yes, he did. And there were two other board members who were sitting back in their chairs, you know, like they were sleeping, like reclining on a jumbo jet on a long overseas trip.
Right. And they weren't paying any attention and being
paying attention. And yet one of them had the nerve to say to a woman who pressed someone for an answer, because they weren't giving her an answer, they were giving her the runaround. So she pressed him for an answer, and he got all indignant as if he was remember those guys with the wigs, the powdered wigs in France at the court of Versailles with the makeup on? He reminded me of a fop that would be at one of those kind of Marie Antoinette parties, just offended that this woman pressed for an answer to this august personage, you know? And the thing that's really weird, though, is that Tinley Park has some good people on the board, better than other villages that I've seen. Other board
much better, much better.
Light years, night and day different. But yet then you do have, you know, two of these bozos that were reclined in the chair, and you have this mayor throwing tantrums here and there and acting silly. It's just a very strange thing for me. The thing that also got me, too, is all of them insisted they have no power. We can't do anything. We have no power.
Yes, now that was what was so frustrating, was that here they made themselves look impotent and ridiculous by continually saying, we have no power to do anything. Now, there is a man on the board, a trustee, his name is Jake Vandenberg, and he seemed like a reasonable person, and he came out right away and said he was against this idea. And then we come to find out that he's the head of the commission board. Okay, so he's the chairman of the planning commission. So it kind of made no sense that he had no idea what Amy Connolly was up to on that commission board. It made no sense at all. And as much as I liked what he had to say, I have to look at it with some skepticism, because if I was the chairperson of a commission board, I think I would want to know what it was up to. And a woman confronted him at the end when he said he was the head of the chairman of the commission board. a woman said to him, well, can you stop this meeting that's happening on Thursday? See, the commission is supposed to be deciding tomorrow what they're going to do and if they're going to let this go through without any elected votes, without any input from the public, because they're not elected, but they have all the power. He is the chairman of this committee. This committee has no legal standing. It has none. As far as I can see, I don't think it has any legal standing because it's a made-up board. And he's the chairman and he's an elected official. If he wanted to, Jake Vandenberg could right now, it could have at that meeting said, I'm the head of the commission and I'm saying we're postponing this meeting. He did not do that. He said, I'll talk to the commissioners, as if the commissioners have some kind of power. He's the guy in charge. He's the chairman of the commission. I don't see any way that this guy can't table that meeting until we get independent legal counsel review of what they did with changing the zoning without going through a zoning hearing.
And Megan, that one good board member, the really good one.
Oh, you're showing Amy Connolly. She's not the good board member.
Right, she's not the good member. She is the one who you're talking about, who's the planning commission director. But that good man,
Michael. I don't know why I can't keep these names straight. Pinito.
Michael Pinito, he was the really good one who stood up and he said, we need to bring in a lawyer, not one of these ones from KLEIN, THORPE, JENKINS. We need a good lawyer, an independent lawyer, to take a look at what's going on here and take a look at what was done with changing that requirement from that legacy code so that, you know, then a couple months later, this low-income housing project, this can get snuck in. We need to take a look if that was legal. What it sounds like is there was collusion here, because it sounds like this woman, Amy Connolly, she, of course, knew that the low-income housing thing wanted to be pushed through. She's in charge of this planning board. She's the planning director.
Well, there's another woman on that board too, and I don't know her name off the top of my head, but her name.
They said last night that this Amy Connolly is the one who wrote this up.
Yeah, she did.
To get this pushed through. That Jake Vandenberg, the board member, he said that no one really.
He didn't know what it was.
He didn't know what it was because he thought it was all about the hookahs. So she told them that it was just about the hookahs. And so then they passed this thing, but she knows full well when this thing passed to remove that commercial requirement, it would benefit that Buckeye Foundation that wanted to build the low-income housing. She knew this. And to me, that sounds like collusion. To me, it sounds like the residents of Orland Park, the property owners, need to get together. They need to hire an attorney, and they need to sue the village to stop this.
Yeah.
Because if that man from Buckeye Foundation is threatening a lawsuit, and someone on the board was like, we don't want to be sued by the developer. We're just going to have to let them do whatever they want. The residents of Orland Park need to take a look at what this Amy Connolly did. And they need to bring some kind of action to take a look at this, because it doesn't seem like this was legitimate. Because if she's pushing this thing through, knowing that it's going to benefit this this Buckeye thing, I'm wondering, what did she get out of it? Did she get something out of doing that?
Well, you know, another thing that didn't get answered last night, one of the residents said, you know, he stood up here, the developer stood up here and talked about all the wonderful people that he dealt with at the village that he's been working with. Well, who are these wonderful people? And I want to know names. Name the names of the wonderful people who worked with this man to develop this building. And that never happened. No one gave the names. So they're still not being transparent. And let's talk about transparency for a moment. You know, I put in a FOIA request a week ago when I read that news article when the first news of this came out. In Illinois, they have 5 days to respond to a FOIA request. I tried to keep it brief. There weren't very many items on it. It shouldn't have taken more than 5 days. As usual, in Cook County, anywhere you go, they're going to immediately file an extension, which is 5 more days, so that they have 10 days to answer you instead of 5, which is totally.
And I want to correct you on that, because the only times I have seen people do this, and this, I do not have an example that is otherwise to this. Every single time that I've encountered any public body that has played games with FOIA production, it has always been a KLEIN, THORPE, JENKINS public body. The only
Oh,
public
that's true.
bodies
That's true.
that
Well,
I
we
have
tell with
seen
so many public
that
bodies
do
that are
this.
represented by them that you're right. My opinion is skewed because it's
I
always,
have not encountered another one. If a public body has other lawyers besides the Kleinthorpe Jenkins firm, I have not seen them play games the way that Kleinthorpe Jenkins public bodies do.
yeah, that is true. And so they're playing games with me already. And we have found also that the public bodies that play the FOIA games and don't want to hand over documents are always the ones who are hiding something. And, again, Jacob Vandenberg last night talked about being transparent and how much, transparency, it's so important. And I didn't get a chance. I didn't want to stand up and take any of the time from the citizens and say, well, if you want to be so transparent, where's my FOIA request? Because it's now late. And I had requested specifically to get it before the meeting date. And there was plenty of time for them to do that. And no one has responded to me about that.
And I believe that Kleinthorpe Jenkins tells these public bodies to stall FOIA production until after something like a meeting, so that you don't have the information. We saw this with Orland Park and the Orland Park Public Library. They had internal incident reports showing that child pornography had been accessed in the Orland Park Library, and the library staff decided not to call the police. There were sex crimes happening in the library, like men masturbating openly at the computers and exposing themselves at the computers, stalking women, sexually harassing female employees. All this was in their incident reports. They held them back and hid them for as long as they could. And meanwhile, Kleinthorpe Jenkins is billing them hours every day in legal fees and legal services just to rack up a huge bill, but telling them to hide this stuff or redact everything on the documents you can't see. And then the public is then forced to go to either the Attorney General's Office of the Public Access Counselor to make them compel the public library to give up its documents, or you have to take them to court and sue them in Chancery Court to get under the Open Meetings Act and under the Freedom of Information Act to make them produce these documents and make them comply with the law. I think Kleinthorpe Jenkins tells public bodies, just hide it, because then there's a 50-50 chance on whether the person in the public who asked for something will go to the trouble to go to all the steps to get it. So why not just hide it? That's what I think they tell them. I think they tell them just to roll the dice.
It's like every time this is a common tactic with government in Illinois anyway. Like, for instance, if you protest your taxes, your property tax, they're told to rubber stamp everything no the first time. And the only ones that they'll ever even look at is when you come back the second time and say, no, I'm appealing that. I'm appealing that decision. You have to be tenacious. You have to stick to it, or you're not going to get it. So that's the same with FOIA. They think, most people, 90%, they're going to just go away. They're going to think, oh, this is not worth it. So you end up having to go to the Attorney General, and nobody wants to do that. So
the insurance companies do that too. They'll deny every claim, and then they wait to see, well, who complains,
right,
and who puts in for a challenge to the denial, and then they'll deny 75% of the next thing, or 25%, whatever. They have these mathematical schemes set up where they just know that a large number of the public won't say anything and won't do anything about it. And here's the thing too, then, if you are someone who then holds them to the fire and takes them to court to get the documents that you want, then the public body tries to villainize that person and say, well, look how much money they cost us. Look how much money they cost us in legal fees. Well, you ran up those legal fees yourself because you knew that you were breaking the law and doing the wrong thing, but you kept paying Kleinthorpe Jenkins anyway, and they were telling you to keep breaking the law. Then you had to go to court, and the judge said that you're breaking the law, and it was clear that you weren't going to win this. So then you have to settle it, and you have to pay all the attorney's fees that it took to get you to do the right thing and to stop doing things like letting sex happen in the library, and stop hiding documents, and stop redacting things you're not allowed to redact. So it's funny that then in Illinois, the public body tries to blame the public. So the public body runs around breaking the law and doing terrible things, and if the public challenges them on it and makes them stop, then the public body cries and says, oh, look how much money this all cost.
Yeah, it's absurd. It's absurd. And of course, that's probably what's going to start happening with Tinley now that they're going to they're going to be barraged with FOIA requests from all sides also, because everybody wants the information. They want to know what's going on. It is getting late, and I've got to get to bed because tomorrow.
One last thing though before we close, what I predict is going to happen already, because I see it. I see this, the developers already threatening a lawsuit. There was this tower construction. They were threatening people. To me, it seemed they were threatening people on that Facebook group for the citizens of Tinley Park, saying, watch what you say and don't say anything defamatory. I feel that these strategic litigation against public participation, SLAPP lawsuits, I think that someone's going to end up filing one of these to silence the public here with this Tinley Park issue, because it's such a thing that happens in Illinois, and people should not be afraid of that, because in Illinois that is illegal for these government entities or a developer who is trying to sue people to shut people up who oppose a development. That is a classic SLAPP lawsuit. And let me tell you, there is a great book by George Pring and Penelope Kanan, C-A-N-A-N for Kanan. Pring is spelled P-R-I-N-G, George Pring. It's on Amazon. It's a fantastic book called SLAPPs, Getting Sued for Speaking Out. There is chapter after chapter of examples of development companies like this Buckeye Foundation who tried to sue people to shut them up, or like this tower construction that wants to sue people to shut them up or is threatening something like that. They lose, and then they have to pay all the legal fees for creating that mess and for filing that bogus lawsuit. So there is a protection there. Don't be afraid to speak out. Don't be afraid to exercise your First Amendment right. Don't be afraid to petition.
Well, and if anybody ever does sue you for speaking out, there are attorneys at the Better Government Association and other citizen advocacy groups who will take your case and will fight for you. And so, there are entire firms set up that this is what they do to defend people against these terrible lawsuits that are totally baseless. Tomorrow is the Planning Commission's meeting. It's open to the public. It's at 7:30. It is at the Tinley Village Hall in the same place that the meeting was last night. It will be the same setup with the overflow room and extra parking if you can get there early enough. So, the village is encouraged to get out and get to this meeting. And this is the Planning Commission meeting is the one you want to be at, because they're the one who's going to make the decision, and they need to hear from the public again. So I'm going to be there. We're going to be filming, and we will see you there. So thanks for listening, and there will be more coming and more videos. Check out the videos. They are on the Storytime Digital Media Facebook page. Kevin has uploaded all of them there, and you can go and see them there or on YouTube. And we will see you soon. Have a blessed day.